The head of the Transitional Military Council in Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, during his first speech on television, committed to address protesters' demand within a week. In Sri Lanka, it is time for paying tribute and recollection to the victims. The death toll of the attacks is increasing. Nearly 290 people have died. These are our top stories. Stay tuned for more details in this newscast. It is strange to think we can feel lonely when we are over 7 billion on the planet. Internet, cell phones, and other wireless devices are everywhere. Despite this, many feel good alone in this great global village. Though our lives are filled with people, it is more of intimacy we are all looking for. The assurance that someone knows us, knows who we are, and feels concerned about what happens to us. By the time the Catholic community of the world is celebrating Easter, therefore the resurrection of Christ, the main message delivered during the commemoration of this symbolic day is love, tolerance, and the desire and commitment to sharing among men. All are different, that is for sure, but sometimes the different becomes a real gap. The feeling of the other is too different can be a bit scary. Despite all the efforts of the world, we hardly appreciate the other in its difference. Yet to love is to tolerate, to accept the others with their difference, their particularity. Moreover, it is written in Psalms 133 of the Holy Scriptures, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessings, even life forevermore. Known as Mosquirix or RTS, this experimental vaccine is the most advanced to date against malaria. The result of more than 30 years of work and a $1 billion investment. The campaign will be launched to confirm the effectiveness of the vaccine on children under 2 years, the most vulnerable to malaria. The campaign begins at the health center in the Malarian capital and will continue the following week in Ghana and Kenya, which are the other 2 countries selected for the program. The World Health Organization hopes to vaccinate 120,000 children in each of these 3 countries by 2020. In preliminary tests conducted from 2009 to 2015 led to the reduction of the number of malarial episodes by 39% in children from 17 months to 5 years. Its effectiveness is therefore relative, but researchers and health authorities hope that in addition to means of prevention, such as insecticide-treated nets, it will significantly reduce the number of victims. According to recent statistics, Africa is by far the most affected continent, with 90% of the world's 435,000 people killed in 2017. Children under 5 years also account for more than 2/3 of these deaths. The goal is to reduce the death toll by 90% in 2030 from the 429,000 recorded in 2015. The new Sudanese head of the Transitional Military Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, in an announcement on national television, assured the demonstrators of the transferring of power to civilian authorities. Power to the people. Moreover, this was the first demand of the protesters who claimed not to want a civilian junta in power. In response to the popular uproar, the leader of the Military Council of the Transition has promised this week to address the demand of the protesters. Discussions had resumed last April 20th between the military and the leaders of the mobilization, including the Sudanese Professionals Association on the front line. The latter had meanwhile announced a press conference for Sunday to reveal the names of the people who will form a civil council, a press conference which finally did not take place. The protest leaders also announced that talks with the army were suspended, calling for intensification of the movement. For one of the spokespersons of the organizations representing the protests, the military council is like an extension of the regime. The head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francois from Rome, during Easter Mass celebration on Sunday, showed his closeness to the affected Christian community as they were gathered in prayer, but also to all the victims of this violence. In his prayer, the Pope entrusted the Lord those who have tragically disappeared, prayed for the wounded, and all those who are suffering because of this dramatic event. While Oliver Ribadeau-Dumas, spokesman of the Conference of Bishops of France, wished that this tragedy in Sri Lanka should invite to be close to those suffering. In addition to religious figures, politicians have been keen to support Sri Lanka. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, expressed his sincere condolences to the families of the victims who had gathered to pray in peace or to visit this country. The President of the European Commission also assured of the support from EU. French President Emmanuel Macron said he was deeply saddened by the terrorist attacks on churches and hotels in Sri Lanka, attacks that he strongly condemned and described as heinous attacks. British Prime Minister Theresa May on Sunday called it very appalling acts of violence, reminding to all that we had to unite to ensure that no one should ever have to exercise their faith in fear, while addressing his most sincere condolences to all the tearful ones. For Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who denounces horrible and criminal attacks, terrorism is spreading like an epidemic around the world. Sri Lanka must be remembered because the country was hit of terrorist attacks, which led to the death of nearly 290 people and over 450 wounded, according to the police. The spokesman of the government later declared that a local Islamic movement was behind this tragedy. The authorities are currently investigating possible connections of the organization with foreign groups. According to polls, Petro Poroshenko loses his election with only 25% of the vote and admits his defeat. He therefore wanted to call and congratulate his opponent. He said he would not give up, but the results from the polling were obvious and gave him every reason to call his opponent and congratulate him. The outgoing president leaves office but decides to stay in politics, a decision that precedes the legislative elections scheduled for the end of October. He added that the following month he will leave his position of head of state as a decision by the majority of Ukrainians, which he accepts and submits himself to. Moreover, the outgoing president welcomed the success of a free, fair, democratic and competitive election. He assured that Ukraine has just established a very new standard of democratic election campaign. The football relations between Germany and Ethiopia are close. The project does not come out of nowhere. For 5 years, a German has led the project of development of Ethio-Germanic football. Joachim Ficker has notably brought the coach of the German under-20s football team to coaches of young Ethiopians. It is in this logic that connections have been established with Bayern Munich. According to the Ethiopian Football Federation, a similar project had been discussed with Arsenal but was not achieved. Developed as part of a partnership with the Ethiopian Football Federation, this project includes a continuous exchange of experience as well as the regular presence of Bayern junior coaches for the training and development of local players and coaches in Addis Ababa. The Germans will be at work to invest, build and manage the school, an establishment whose details are not known. How many young people will be admitted every year by Bayern Munich? Will families have to pay all or part of the tuition fees? Discussions will take place in the coming months. The Ethiopian football authorities are careful not to put forward a timetable for the actual opening of the school. The German club already has 5 schools around the world, in the United States, China, Thailand, Japan, and in Singapore. The head of the Transitional Military Council in Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, during his first speech on television, committed to address protesters' demand within a week. In Sri Lanka, it is time for paying tribute and recollection to the victims. The death toll of the attacks is increasing. Nearly 290 people have died. That's all for our newscast today. Stay tuned on Gabon 24 for more news.